Is that a problem?
Of course, right? There's no tracking and there's no requirement for them to even identify the individual.
Well, at least 66 people are dead and almost 80 others injured after a pipeline exploded in Mexico.
And then he would say, well, you are now worthy to become a Zeta.
Heriberto Lazcano, the head of the Zetas cartel, is believed to have been shot during a gun battle with Marines on Monday.
Drug war, one of the top leaders of the ruthless Las Zetas drug cartel is under arrest. He's Miguel Angel Trevino Morales.
Are these cartels really trained by old U.S. operatives from SEAL Team 6 and the Delta Force? Let's dive in. U.S. trains the CJNG. The Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, or CJNG, has established itself as one of the most feared paramilitaries in Mexico over the last decade. Images of the group have become the standard depiction of the Mexican cartels writ large. The propaganda videos often feature groups of masked men bristling with enough small arms to make them formidable against even conventional armies. In an interview in May 2019, a former CJNG soldier described his experience at a training camp and claimed that the cartel employed U.S. Special Operations Forces to train their recruits. According to the former assassin, there was a group of elite Marines. They were members of the United States Navy. There were Delta Forces. There was everything there. The cartel dropouts account is consistent with years of reports which show that U.S. Special Forces training is diffusing into the services of paramilitaries in Mexico. The Special Forces training has been funded under the Plan Merida, which has resulted in the U.S. providing more than $1.6 billion for fighting the war on drugs, most of it in military aid. In 2019, after a U.S. expat family was destroyed by drug cartel gunmen, then President Donald Trump tweeted that now was the time for Mexico, with the help of the United States, to wage war on the drug cartels and wipe them off the face of the earth. However, the goal of defeating the cartels is undermined when U.S. Special Forces soldiers are actually assisting their enemy and training drug cartels that commit horrific atrocities.
The 50 cal is legal to buy in the United States. Now they go upwards of $8,000 to $10,000.
How quickly are guns that are being bought and trafficked across the border turning up at crime scenes in Mexico?
So, they're not being sold to a lot of people, but as the law currently stands, they are not illegal to own in the United States.
Mexico's Los Zetas cartel trained by U.S. military forces. The most well-known example of U.S. training disseminating into the wrong hands has been Los Zetas. The Zetas were enforcers for the Gulf Cartel, which recruited deserters from Mexico's Airborne Special Forces Group. Formed in 1986 as an elite quick reaction force specializing in counterinsurgency and unconventional warfare, the GAFEs received their first combat experience in the brutal fight with the leftist Zapatista National Liberation Army in Chiapas, when the North American Free Trade Agreement took effect in 1994. According to reporting by Mexican journalist Carlos Marin, the army deployed the GAFEs in Chiapas to create paramilitaries and displace the population in order to disrupt the support of the people in the area for the EZLN, a counterinsurgency approach which would later be used against organized crime. In reporter Iwan Grillo's book, El Narco, he describes how the mutilated bodies of rebels captured the GAFEs were dumped along a riverbank with their ears and noses sliced off, the sort of spectacular exhibitions of violence for which the Zetas would later be known. Some of the original members of the Zetas were reportedly trained by the US at the notorious School of the Americas, although conflicting accounts exist about exactly who, where, and when, with some sources like the FBI claiming they were training at Fort Benning, and others like a former Special Forces commander claiming the GAFEs trained with the Army's Green Berets at Fort Bragg. A classified 2009 memo from the US State Department published by WikiLeaks claimed that their own incomplete official records found that none of the known Zetas had ever participated in US-funded training programs using their real names, but acknowledged that other intelligence sources indicated that one former Mexican military officer trained in the US was forcibly recruited by the Zetas. According to a retired US Army Lieutenant Colonel, Craig Deere, it was likely that more than 500 GAFs trained in the US with the 7th Special Forces Group nicknamed the Snake Eaters. Deere served as the former academic dean at the Pentagon's Center for Hemispheric Defense Studies, the intellectual center of gravity of US defense policy in Latin America since 1997. Deere, who previously commanded US Special Forces, told Al Jazeera, "I had some visibility on what was happening, because this issue was related to things I was doing in the Pentagon in the 1990s. He said with the GAFEs. We're given map reading courses, communications, standard Special Forces training, light to heavy weapons, machine guns, and automatic weapons. The 7th SFG specializes in the approach the US has taken with Latin America since the end of the Second World War: unconventional warfare, counterinsurgency, and more recently, counterterrorism. During the Reagan administration in the 1980s, the 7th SFG trained, advised, and fought with some of the most brutal and repressive special operations and unconventional forces in Latin America. in countries such as Bolivia, Colombia, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Panama, Peru, and Venezuela. Between 1996 and 1999, 3,200 soldiers, including at least 500 GAFAs, were reportedly trained by the 7th SFG in counter-narcotics for fighting on behalf of the post-Cold War U.S. national security agenda. In what is often framed as an ironic consequence of the corrupting influence of the cartels, the training from the U.S. and Mexican Special Forces diffused into the service of one of Mexico's oldest drug trafficking organizations, the Gulf Cartel. In 1997, the same year as the inception of the Pentagon Center for Hemispheric Defense Studies, Arturo Guzman de Senta, a GAFA better known by the alias El Zeta Uno, defected along with other members of Mexico's Airborne Special Forces Group to work for Gulf Cartel boss Ociel Cardenas Guelen. Trained and experienced in counterinsurgency and unconventional warfare before being repurposed supposedly to fight drug trafficking, former GAFAs would become one of the most infamous and brutal drug trafficking organizations in history, Los Zetas. The Zetas' advanced training and application of military tactics were used to justify Mexican President Felipe Calderón's decision to deploy the military to prosecute the war against drug trafficking in his first month of office in 2006. The consequences of that decision have been devastating for Mexico, leading to at least 100,000 casualties. Assimilating other U.S. forces. According to a 2009 DEA memo, the Zetas also recruited other U.S.-trained Latin American special forces, like the Guatemalan Caibayles. The Caibayles and other security forces were trained by the U.S. in counterinsurgency and unconventional warfare before, during, and after Guatemala's 36-year genocide. After a 1999 report commissioned by the United Nations determined that more than 200,000 people eliminated and disappeared by the Guatemalan army constituted a genocide, the School of the Americas briefly closed, before reopening a year later under a new name, the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation. According to testimony from a former instructor at the school, the changes were only superficial. An identical curriculum was taught from the same instruction manuals. Between 1999 and 2010, 3,555 Guatemalan soldiers, many of them Caibayles, were trained by the U.S. through WINSEC and other programs. In training, the Caibayles learned to exterminate without mercy or thoughts. Recruits were reportedly given a puppy to look after and bond with for several weeks before they are ordered to destroy the animal with their bare hands and consume the blood and flesh, a method which has since diffused to the Mexican GAFAs that train with the Caibayles. In 1982, the Caibayles took the lives of 226 people in the small Dos Eres village. According to the United Nations Truth Commission clarification, the Caibayles arrived in the middle of the night and accused the residents of being leftist guerrilla sympathizers. The smallest children were reportedly exterminated by smashing their head against trees and buildings, while older children were slain with a hammer. Adults were interrogated and tortured individually, and the women were physically exploited. The Caibayles also reportedly cut fetuses out of pregnant women. After the interrogation, the adults were fatally punished and the corpses were dumped in a well. A few years after the merciless slayings, one of the Caibayles officers who has supervised the slayings at Dos Eres, Pedro Pimentel Rios, became an instructor at the School of the Americas. In 2012, he was extradited from the US and sentenced to more than 6,000 years in prison for his participation in the atrocity. In 1983, journalist Raymond Bonner reported on a classified summary of an April 1982 meeting between foreign policy advisors and the Reagan administration. The advisors proposed a series of secret and overt programs to contain the Sandinista government in Nicaragua and prevent revolutionary movements from spilling over into El Salvador and Guatemala. One of the proposals included a $2.5 million budget for the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, for arms interdiction in Guatemala. According to journalist Leslie Gelb, the arms interdiction program was managed by Argentina rather than by the US directly. The Argentines and even US intelligence service personnel allegedly worked directly with the paramilitary extinction squads during the Guatemalan genocide. According to a declassified 1994 Defense Intelligence Agency (DIA) memo, intelligence sources reported clandestine graves outside of a Guatemalan military facility and described Guatemalan soldiers disappearing captives by flying them over the ocean in a helicopter before pushing them to their demise, a technique which was also used in Argentina. After the Cold War, the Caibayles were repurposed to fight the new greatest threat to US national security, drugs, and later terror. From 2007 to 2014, US Special Forces training tripled in Latin America, mostly in the US Department of Defense's Southern Command's SOUTHCOM area of responsibility in the Caribbean, Central, and South America. The US military allegedly continues to train the Caibayles to this day.
That's a pretty direct pipeline.
So if I find somebody who wants to sell me their .50 caliber rifle in a parking lot somewhere,
There are no background checks that get done when it's a person-to-person sale.
I can do that transaction in cash, and you at the ATF have no idea that that gun has changed hands.
That is correct.
Is that a problem?
Yeah, of course, right? There's no tracking and there's no requirement for them to even identify the individual. So those unlicensed dealers can buy 10, 15, 20 rifles and law enforcement has zero visibility.
U.S. War on Cartels. In August 2012, Wired reported that 200 U.S. Marines were sent to Guatemala to patrol along the Pacific coast in the ongoing Operation Martillo, which began on January 15, 2012 in addition to a combat mission to clear the Zetas. The U.S.-led operation included military personnel and law enforcement agents from Belize, Canada, Colombia, Costa Rica, El Salvador, France, Guatemala, Honduras, the Netherlands, Nicaragua, Panama, Spain, and the United Kingdom. Between January 2012 and April 2013, the operation intercepted 171 tons of cocaine and 28,000 pounds of marijuana, detained 411 criminal suspects, recovered $7.4 million in laundered cash, and seized or destroyed 139 speedboats, fishing vessels, aircraft, pangas, and drug trafficking submersibles.
Well, at least 66 people are dead and almost 80 others injured after a pipeline exploded in Mexico.
And then he would say, well, you are now worthy to become a Zeta. He would have them fight each other until the last man was standing.
Heriberto Lazcano, the head of the Zetas cartel, is believed to have been shot during a gun battle with Marines on Monday.
Between January 2012 and May 2015, 515 tons of cocaine and 117,754 pounds of marijuana had been seized, worth $8 billion to drug organizations. It had also led to the arrest of at least 1,348 people. Between January 2012 and February 2017, 693 tons of cocaine, $25 million in cash, 581 vessels and aircraft were detained, and 1,863 further detainees were arrested.
Mexico's Navy says it's confident it has killed one of the country's top drug lords.
Drug war, one of the top leaders of the ruthless Las Zetas drug cartel is under arrest. He's Miguel Angel Trevino Morales.
In a world of bad characters, analysts say Miguel Angel Trevino Morales held a special place.
Mexican Marines captured him yesterday just across the border from the United States.
That's all for today, folks. See you next time.